Our current largest project is in Mali with the manuscripts of Timbuktu. And people who follow the geopolitical situation know that Western Africa, particularly as you get more in the northern part of Western Africa, is really a front line for all kinds of religious and ethnic conflicts. The power of governments there is evaporating before our very eyes. Countries are essentially imploding in their ability to maintain security, and yet they have these incredibly rich collections. So we're very privileged to be working in places like that. The lesson we've learned is that you can't predict what the next conflict zone is going to be, because so many parts of the world are much more on a kind of knife's edge than we can realize. And so it's not as if we have powers of prognostication so that we can say, in 5 years, there's going to be something happening in Kashmir, and so we better be there. It just doesn't work that way. So instead, we try to follow our noses. We cultivate contacts. There are areas where we have not done much work. For example, Central Asia. There's incredibly rich culture. These are countries which face a number of challenges in the post-Soviet space. Enormous problems with corruption, with nepotism, with ethnic tensions. We'd love to get in there. We haven't yet. So we do have some places that are kind of in the longer view. But meanwhile, with our work in South Asia and India, now in North India, as well as the work we did in Kerala, in the area that has a lot of Christians, and in Nepal, and a new project with a very interesting collection of Persian and Urdu manuscripts that used to be in Delhi. And in 1947, when India was partitioned, they took half of them to the new state of Pakistan just in case. And the other half are still in Delhi. So here's a great example of how the digital space allows you to reunite a collection, which is now lying on opposite sides of a very hostile border.
You have such a trench-level view of how this all unfolds on the ground. When manuscripts are destroyed in war, is it as a collateral damage kind of thing, or are they, I imagine that they vary, but are they more frequently now being specifically targeted for what they are, for their intrinsic content?
So if the conflict is religiously motivated, there's a higher danger that things could be targeted.
So much of the Iraq-Syria thing with ISIS.
And what happened in Timbuktu. There were initial reports back in 2013 that the great libraries of Timbuktu had been destroyed because of this kind of complicated jihadist takeover of the town, which was religious. It was also an ethnic conflict. And there were some photographs of burned manuscripts. And then it turned out most of them had been evacuated ahead of time. So somebody knew that this was coming. The reason the manuscripts that they found were burned is because they weren't just Qurans. Therefore, this marvelous expanse of Islamic learning, of legal commentary, of poetry, of devotional works, of texts about medicine and healing and prayers, all of this was a threat to that worldview. Now, before we get too smug, there are also people in the Christian world who might have a similarly fanatical view of what's appropriate literature. And so the common enemy for all of us who work in this field, whatever our national identity or whatever our religious affiliation, if we even have one, the common enemy is that kind of intolerance that can't bear the idea that there are significant texts, significant voices that are different from their own.
You know, when I hear you in the Jefferson lecture talk about the anti-elitism, the resentment of the concentration of wealth that led to the plundering of the Cluny Abbey, for example, in 1798. I'm sure there are a lot of people who see parallels with our time today. What can you tell us about that? I mean, is it an apt comparison?
So the French Revolution, I mean, there was such a rich background to it, but there was certainly resentment at disparity of wealth and the concentration of power in elite institutions. So when you stop and think, well, perhaps there are some parallels. I mean, income inequality has never been greater than it is right now. I think we're keenly aware of that. That's becoming more and more an issue on all sides of the aisle, and perhaps for different motivations or perceptions, but everybody's feeling it. And I think also this sense that somehow the people we trusted to do it right have let us down. Universities, political institutions, churches, the media, the blowback that the media is getting now. I mean, I think of the old days of Walter Cronkite. everybody trusted Walter Cronkite. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or Republican, where you lived, you turned on the news and there was Walter Cronkite and he said it and you believed it. That seems about 1 million years ago. So then the question is, are we going to have a revolution like there was in 1798? Can we find a way to navigate those really choppy waters with our existing political institutions and economic institutions, with our Constitution, which is a remarkably durable document, no matter how battered it sometimes seems? Or are we going to find that the situation has become such that those institutions can't work anymore? I think we still have time before it gets that far, but I think this makes it important for us then to look at these lessons of the past and say, well, what happened in France in the 18th century? What happened in Europe in the 1930s? Could that happen here? What did they think might be possible in their countries? So the only way to sort of step back from that kind of situation is to gain an historical perspective, find ways to listen to the voices of the other, disagree vehemently, but disagree with ground rules for what that debate will be like and then what the process is for making a decision afterwards. Because if we lose that, we've lost it all.